What will life be like when the COVID-19 crisis passes? What aspects are going to remain with us and what's going to disappear? Now, clearly the coronavirus pandemic has thrust us into a moment of rapid change, but most of us don't like change. It makes us feel uncomfortable. We like to have a level of certainty about our future, about our health, about our jobs. We want certainty about the world of finance and the world of property that most of us are interested in. But at present, a lot of us are unsure about what the future holds. However, I've found that there are lessons in history, lessons that will provide us with some important insights. So in today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, I'd like to discuss with you a few things that never change in a world that never stops changing. I'd like to show you how things that never change are really the ones that you should be paying attention to. But of course the media doesn't focus on those. They like all the changes because they're concerning, they're surprising. It's something the media can comment on and get clicks on, isn't it? However, I've found that to be a successful property investor, a successful business person, I've had to be prepared for change, but I've also had to understand the things that stay the same. So at the end of today's show, you're going to come out with some ideas about how to get some more certainty in these uncertain times. I'm also going to share with you a mindset moment from one of my mentors, and then I'm going to have a chat with Ken Race, Director of Metropole Wealth Advisory, about estate planning. Now, maybe that's not the most exciting topic for you, but it really is something that should be on the agenda no matter what your age is, because as we started to say, we've got no idea what the future holds, so why not be prepared for it? So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Today I'd like to discuss with you a few things that never change in a world that never stops changing. Now, the idea for this chat came from a client who asked me, Michael, how do you remain optimistic? How do you not get pessimistic with all the negative news? What do you look at? What do you read? And I explained to him that it's the things that never change that are the most important things to pay attention to. However, it's change that gets the most attention, doesn't it? It gets the attention because it's exciting, it's surprising, it's something that the media can comment on. However, I've found that to become a successful investor, a successful business person, I've had to prepare for change, but I've also had to understand those things that stay the same. Now, don't be confused by all this. It's not a play on words. Stay with me and I'll explain what I'm getting at. You see, predicting the future is very hard. Very few can do it. On the other hand, understanding what stays the same, now that's very useful, particularly in challenging times like we're experiencing at the moment. Of course, I've still got no idea what's going to happen in the future, but I'm a little less surprised whatever does happen if I've got a handful of assumptions that I can put my faith in to guide me moving forward. So let's have a look at some things that never change in a world that never stops changing. First of all, I'd like to explain that more people wake up every morning wanting to solve problems than wake up looking to cause harm. Now, I'm an optimist and I've got faith in society, but I also realise there's a lot of pessimists out there and there's a lot of people who've got negative thoughts. And negative messages get more airplay in the media and they incite negative sentiment in our society, don't they? The fact is, in life, you get whatever you expect. But the question is, what do you want? What are you expecting? Over the years, I've found that those with an optimistic outlook, they do much better in life. They do better in business. They're better investors. While those with a pessimistic outlook, they tend to remain worried, fretful, and they find what they're looking for: bad times. Now, in her book, The Optimism Bias, Tali Sharrett writes the following, and I think there's some profound words here. She says, "Optimism protects us from accurately perceiving the pain and the difficulties the future undoubtedly holds. And optimism may defend us from viewing our options in life as somewhat limited." She said, as a result, stress and anxiety are reduced, physical and mental health are improved, and the motivation to act and to be productive is enhanced. She went on to say, in order to progress, we need to be able to imagine alternative realities, but not just any old realities, better ones, and we need to believe them as possible. Now, there's some wise words, aren't they? In other words, if we're not optimistic, none of us would bother setting up a business, employing people, taking a risk, or even investing in property. If we're totally realistic about how often people fail, how often things go wrong, how most property investors never build a substantial property portfolio, we'd never even bother getting started, would we? I've said it before. Your thoughts lead to your feelings lead to your actions, and your actions lead to your results. In other words, your outside world is a reflection of what's happening inside your mind. So my suggestion is to feed it with positive, optimistic thoughts. Optimists are more likely to do well in the future. And so my first concept I'd like to share with you is that in general, there are more people getting up each day wanting to make the world a better place. The second thought I'd like to share with you, one of those things that doesn't change but helps me by understanding it, is an interesting expression I learned from columnist Morgan Housel from Collaborative Fund. And he said this. He said, "The world breaks about once a decade. The world breaks about once a decade." It's true. And there seems to be very few exceptions to this. There's a major disruption every decade or so. It could be economic, it could be political, it could be military, it could be a social issue. At present, we've got a combination of three major issues, haven't we? A worldwide health pandemic, a recession in almost every country in the world, and in lots of places, political unrest and social unrest. Looking back at almost the last, 50 years that I've been a student of economics, it's actually easy to see these major disruptions that happen once a decade or so. It's easy to see them in hindsight. But at the time, nobody saw them coming. Now, of course, apart from these major disruptions that happen every decade or so, there's also the unexpected X factors, the black swan events. They come out of the blue every year to mess up our best laid forecasts. Sometimes they're on the positive side and sometimes they're on the negative side. So one of the things that holds steady and that helps me move forward is to understand that the world breaks about once a decade. But that leads me into the third thing that doesn't change, and that's that bad news is never as bad as it sounds. Think about it. How many times does the end of the world as we know it need to arrive before you realise that it's not the end of the world as we know it? Of course, those with a long-term perspective, those who've lived through a number of economic shocks, those who've invested through a number of property cycles, they tend not to get as shocked when major events like we're now experiencing hit us. However, those who haven't experienced these types of shocks, they tend to worry more. They imagine the worst because they've got no perspective to rely on. And that's one of the reasons that the younger generations, the Generation Z and Y, are going to suffer more from the effects of the challenges we're going through at the moment, the pandemic and the recession, being out of job. First of all, they don't have much to fall back on in the way of perspective to understand this. And then, unfortunately, they're in their life stages which are in general going to be more affected by this. The fourth thing that doesn't change that I'd like you to remember is this too shall pass. In other words, nothing too good and nothing too bad stays that way forever. I found these type of major upheavals are not as scary if you have the underlying belief that they're going to keep happening. But despite them, in the long term, they don't prevent the long-term growth of our economy and our property markets. In other words, each boom sets us up for the next downturn, just as each downturn plants the seeds for the next upturn. In Australia, our property markets have had a long-term upward trend, but in the short term they move up and down. But for the 40 years that they've been keeping careful statistics of our property markets. In the capital cities, well-located properties have kept increasing in value despite the economic downturns, the recessions, the up and down political upheavals. So the thing to remember is this too shall pass. The fifth and last thing I'd like to share with you, one of those things that doesn't change, is the concept that history doesn't actually repeat itself. However, we've all heard it said before, history repeats itself. It's an inane statement which seems so wise on the surface, but it crumbles when you look at it seriously. In fact, Morgan Housel, somebody I often quote, author at Collaborative Fund, wisely said, history is mostly the study of unprecedented events which, ironically, we end up then using as a map for what happens in the future. Hey, that makes no sense. The problem, as I'm saying, is that the world, our economies, change. They evolve over time, and what worked in the past may not work today or tomorrow. History is the past. History is merely what occurred yesterday and before. The trouble is, many people try to extrapolate the future based on history. Now, take, for example, the theory that the Reserve Bank and other central banks used it for a number of years before we ran into the current economic crisis. Remember, they kept lowering interest rates, and other countries did it since the global financial crisis. In Australia, the last few years, they kept lowering interest rates in an attempt to stimulate their economies, to lower unemployment. But in reality, it didn't work that time round, did it? Similarly, during this current crisis we're experiencing, the Reserve Bank and central banks around the world, they've kept our financial systems from falling apart because of what they've learned from the past. In the process of doing it, they've ruined the assumptions of lots of people had about how our economy works and messed up those forecasts about how bad this recession would be. So here we are in the second half of 2020 at a time when it's hard to make sense of the world. It's a world that would have seemed unfathomable a decade ago. But what I'm trying to show you is that some things never change, and you need a perspective to get through this time. It's a time in history that when we look back, it'll be a seminal year. It'll be a year that we'll never forget, and a year that our grandchildren are going to learn about at school. But it's also a year when many people are going to hurt, jobs are going to go, businesses are going to go broke, but a lot of people are going to be in a much better position in a year's time, health-wise, business-wise. Our economy will pick up. And if you believe we're going to get over this and that the world will survive and there will be a normal again and that Australia is going to be a destination that lots of people are going to want to live in because of all the benefits we've got. We've still got one of the best economies, the best performing economies in the world. Yes, I know our government's taken on a lot of extra debt to get us through this, but it's working well. If you believe that it's the place that immigration is going to come to again, then if you've got a secure job, if you've got a safe financial future, my suggestion is you start looking after your future by getting involved in property investment or adding to your current property portfolio, because I don't know what the future is going to hold, but I can suggest to you it's unlikely the government's going to have the funds to look after you, so you've got to look after yourself by, over time, not get rich quick, building a property portfolio. So who can you get for advice? Who can you get to give you direction and certainty in these uncertain times? Well, you're going to need more than the buyer's agent. You're going to need more than the property strategist. You're going to need a team with a holistic approach moving forward. And that's what my team at Metropole can offer you. We usually start by helping our clients build a strategic property plan for themselves so they plan to become the people they plan to become by bringing their future forward, bringing it into the present, and understanding what's realistic, understanding what's feasible, understanding what's possible, understanding what they've got to do to achieve the results they want. Then once you've got the plan, we will help you implement that plan. We have buyer's agency, property management, renovations, development, financial planning, wealth advisory. That's a holistic approach to help you achieve the financial results you deserve. Go to metropole.com.au, find out about what we do, because I'd like to be part of your wealth creation journey. Metropole.com.au. And remember, some things never change in a world that never stops changing. We've been helping investors for over 20 years. In the last couple of years, we've won multiple awards as Australia's leading property consultants, and we're there to help you.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I'd like to remind you that your path along the road to success is going to be littered with stumbling blocks. You see, over the last couple of years, I can think of two friends who are both high-performing salespeople and who expressed a burning desire to succeed in life and in their careers. They both quit their jobs. Things got too tough and they gave up. They couldn't hack it anymore. And I've seen the same happen to property investors when the economy turns or the markets turn, or stumbling blocks are put in their way. Yet these investors and my friends, when you spoke to them, they expressed a strong desire to succeed. If you asked them a while ago, they were sure they were going to succeed. So what happened? My early mentor Jim Rohn put it well when he explained that there are three parts to desire: dreaming, the vision, and the focus. Here's what he said. First, there's the dreaming. Have you let yourself dream lately? Jim Rohn asked. Just sit down and begin to imagine all the incredible possibilities your life could become. Spend some time dreaming, Jim Rohn said. So, first step is dreaming. Number two, Jim Rohn said, is the vision. Once you dream, you begin to cut back on all the possibilities and narrow it down to the possibility which is what you really want. You begin to create a vision for your life, said Jim Rohn. You begin to see it as you want it. And then lastly, you change desire into focus. Once you've got the vision, you really have to focus on that dream. This is really when you get specific about what your life is going to look like moving forward. Now, there's also three parts for dedication, said Jim Rohn. Number one, the plan. Two, the beginning, and three, perseverance. First is the plan, said Jim Rohn. Without a plan, you're going to drift to and fro. You're certainly not going to carry out your dream if you don't have a plan. So write it down, set your goals, know what you want and how you're going to get there. Now, you've heard that said over and over again, but in my mentorship program, I know that those people who write down their plans, write down their goals, and visualize them are much, much more likely to get them, because that's because your reticular activating system kicks in and starts looking for those things that are going to help you get there. You know that story, that if you're going to buy a white Toyota, all of a sudden you see white Toyotas all over the road. Your reticular activating system is that part of the brain that cuts out all the surplus extraneous information that's coming in and hones in as your GPS. So Jim Rohn said, what you've got to do, number one, is write down your plan. That makes sense. He said, number two is the beginning. This may sound simple, and yet it's simply profound. Many people have a dream, and they even have a plan, but they never begin. So simple. Just start. The first step on a long journey is just one step. If you've got a dream and a plan, take the step in the right direction. And Jim Rohn said, the last thing is to persevere. Every road to every dream has a section that's hard to travel, said Jim Rohn. Every great dream will encounter difficulty. The question isn't whether or not you're going to encounter trouble, but how you're going to respond to that trouble. So my question to you is, will you quit when the going gets tough, or will you persevere? I've found that every successful person I know, myself included, has encountered problems along the way that tempted them to quit. Yet they persevered, and then they achieved their dreams. As always, wise words from America's foremost business philosopher. Your job then is to put these words into action so that the stumbling blocks along the way don't trip you over. Have a dream, have a vision, have a focus, and then write down your plan, get going, and persevere. Estate planning is different for everyone, and especially in today's modern environment where there's so many blended families. So with more people remarrying, it's really critical to prepare for the distribution of your wealth on your passing. Not something we like to talk about, but it happens. Now, last week on the podcast, we had Ken Race answering Joanne's question about the need to prepare a will. And as we were discussing this, we realised that there's lots more involved. And so today I'd like to have a talk about estate planning with Ken Race again and understand some of the critical documents you need to prepare. So welcome, Ken Race.
Oh, thank you, Michael.
Now, Ken, for those of you who don't know, is Director of Metropole Wealth Advisory, and while he's an accountant and a financial planner and a successful property investor, he helps our clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth. But in particular, you're very interested in estate planning because it's something a lot of people don't think about, Ken, until it's a bit too late.
That's certainly correct. And I think it's part of our mantra of helping clients grow, protect and passing on their wealth, because you want to be able to pass on that wealth in the most effective and efficient manner without necessarily paying taxes that could have been avoided, and then to protect those assets in future generations. So the will and your estate planning is quite critical to that very central component of wealth creation.
Well, people have a property plan. They sometimes have a finance plan. They have a plan for where they're going on holidays and all the rest of the things, but they actually don't plan for the next stage for passing on, Ken, as you say. So there's a number of documents that I believe are important. And this is really regardless of what your age is, what you feel your health is, and even, to be fair, your level of wealth, because we've all got something we want to pass on. Sometimes it's sentimental things that you want to pass on. So, Ken, let's go through the critical documents that one needs to prepare. What's the first one?
Look, you've obviously got to have a will of some sort, but within a will, I think it's very critical to set it up so that your wealth is passed on not directly to your descendants, but via a trust. And that is called a testamentary trust. And that is to me, one of the most important components of your estate planning, because that will protect those assets to stay within the family and will greatly reduce potential taxes that will apply on the income or capital gains from the sale of those assets by subsequent generations. So testamentary trust to me is critical as part of your will.
Now, that's really interesting because, unfortunately, I lost my mother 2.5 years ago, and she had been given that good advice, and it has made a significant tax benefit to us, to my kids and to my grandkids, and it actually it has been very instrumental in making it easier for me to make life easier for my kids through paying school fees and other things in a non-tax deductible way, because you can distribute income to minors through a testamentary trust without paying the tax.
Correct. So income to a minor is normally taxed at 66% on a sliding scale down, but income via the testamentary trust, the child is taxed at the adult tax rates, which is $18,200 tax-free.
Yeah.
So that is just a small benefit of the testamentary trust that can make a significant difference with the available cash moving forward.
Now, I think we've got to give a disclaimer here right at the beginning that this is not individual tax or financial advice, because I know with your financial planning hat, you can't give this because we don't know what the person listening to this is thinking about, what their situation is. But if they want to understand more about that, go to metropole.com.au and click on Wealth Advisory and have a chat with Ken and his team. Now, Ken, a will handles things that are yours, your own estate, but there's a lot of stuff that we own, whether it's super, whether it's things in trusts. I'd actually had very, very little in my name, and I think that's the same with a lot of successful business people and investors. So how do you handle those?
Yeah, so they're called non-estate assets, and the biggest one for most people is superannuation. Money in super is not yours. It's a funny thing to say, but it's not yours. It's part of the super fund that is set up to generate retirement income for you. So there's a couple of different documents that people can use. The more traditional one is what's called a binding death nomination. But people with more complex wealth, blended families, larger superannuation balances use what's called a superannuation will. The problem with the binding death nomination is, particularly if it's used in a self-managed super fund environment, it's a very technical document, and if incorrectly drawn up, can be easily challenged by other people in your family group.
I guess it gets back to what we said last week, that you can't get a $30 will kit or go to Wills Online type thing. What you really got to do is get a good estate lawyer working together with your tax consultants to advise you. What about an enduring power of attorney? What's that all about, Ken?
So think of the will as the document that kicks in on your death. So on your death, your instructions in the will are then carried out by your executor. But if you don't die, you could be in a coma, you could have dementia, you're incapacitated in some way, then your will doesn't start. So you need what's called an enduring power of attorney to pass decision making to other people. The beauty of that document is it can be as broad as, I'll allow that other person to make any decision that I would have made, to one that is very specific. You could give people specific powers, maybe to sign a contract. So the enduring power of attorney can be used while you're travelling. So recently, for my daughter, when she was overseas, we needed to sign the contract of purchase because she was overseas at the time. So she gave her mother specific power to sign that contract of exchange on the purchasing of that property. So that is a very critical document, either in the unfortunate circumstances of incapacity or if you're unavailable due to travel or other reasons as well.
What about medical issues, though, Ken? I've heard of people having a sort of medical power of attorney. What's all that about?
Yeah, so because it's medical, as does the normal power of attorney, they're very state-based documents. So we must follow the particular rules in the state that it's drawn up in. But the medical power of attorney helps you finalise your wishes in relation to things like organ donation, because it's a funny thing. On death, the people, your spouses, as an example, your dead body becomes their property. So while you may have asked for
That's different from when you're alive, is
it? What's yours is mine and what's mine is mine.
Yes.
I'm saying.
Yes.
So while you may have wanted organ donation, then those wishes can be overruled by someone who now owns your body. So that allows you a more legal way to pass on organs. It also allows you to determine when they turn off the life support system, as an example. So our relatives don't like to think that they're going to cause our death. So many of us hang on maybe far too long before making that very, very sensitive decision to turn off the power. So the medical power of attorney can actually dictate a whole series of things, non-resuscitation, turn off the switch, etc., which then the medical providers will follow.
Okay, this is another document that's really not a legal document that I think one needs to prepare, and that's all your personal details. You've actually got to have this all written down somewhere, a list of all this, including, I guess, your passwords and your logins and your various bank accounts and where you've hidden the jewellery and things like that.
Correct. One of the most unfortunate things, I remember when I was more in the accounting arena, a lot of spouses came to me saying, what is my spouse's account numbers, passwords? And obviously I didn't know, because people don't divulge that level of sensitivity normally to their accountant. And the surviving spouse then doesn't know what there is and where it is. So a significant issue is prepare a list of where all the payments are made, what bank accounts, what for, the relative passwords. And nowadays there are systems and programs you can buy to help make that an easier function, or you use the cloud-based systems which are free. And a lot of my clients will put the data in one area and the passwords in another. And then that way the executor knows where to go and look to actually understand what your issues are. Unfortunately, we had the spouse of a deceased client who came to us who found out that they were paying for subscriptions many, many years after the death of the partner. And that's because it had been set up via credit card and it had never been cancelled.
Terrible. So in summary, prepare for the inevitable by smart estate planning, by having somebody on your side preparing a number of documents, including a will, preparing for your non-estate assets, having an enduring power of attorney, having the consideration of a medical power of attorney, and also just having that simple document explaining where everything is, what accounts you've got, what passwords you've got. Ken, thank you very much. And if our listener wants to understand a bit more about this and have a chat with your team, I know they can go to metropole.com.au, click on the Wealth Advisory tab and find out all about your team services. Thank you so much for your time, Ken.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, at the beginning of today's show, I told you I was going to explain some things that never change. And one of the things that's not going to change is I'll be back twice a week with new episodes of the Michael Yardney podcast to give you a different type of insight into what's happening in our world of property, finance, money and success. I hope you got some insights from today's show. And if you did, please tell somebody about it, because my aim is to make as many people as financially fluent as possible so they can cope with the challenging times as well. If you got some benefit from this, you can also tell the world by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this. 1 star, 5 star, I don't mind. Well, I actually do mind, but I'm only getting 5-star reviews. And if I read yours out, as I'm about to for T Brown 036 today, I'd like to say thank you by gifting you one of my books. So T Brown 036 left a 5-star review saying, "Such an amazing podcast. I love listening to your podcast and learning new things every time. Incredibly inspiring, educating and impactful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom." Well, thank you for those kind words, T Brown. And if you email me, michael@metropole.com.au, I'd love to gift you one of my books as a way of saying thank you. I'll be back again real soon. I'm back twice a week with the Michael Yardney podcast. But in the meantime, you can catch up with me on social media. Just look up Michael Yardney. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?